It's story time with the Histories, with your hosts, Matt Marie and Jen Dumas.
So, Matt, have you ever seen the Simpsons episode, the Prohibition one, where Homer Simpson, yells out beer, the cause of and solution to all our problems?
Yes, I love that one.
Classic episode. I actually don't think it's beer that's the cause of and solution to all our problems. I'm feeling globalization here.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. All my the Bernie bros out there, everybody knows it's big corporations, it's out of control spending, it's consumption on consumption on consumption. You're right. I'm there for that.
It is. Think about this. We as a human race have to have more upon more upon more. And especially in the United States, we talk about how the more you have, the more you're valued in society, whether it's money, whether it's the, latest technology. And if we think about what it takes to get all of that, it is literally causing all the issues we're facing today, down to the fact that it took me 3 weeks to get my dog's bully sticks in order for him to calm down.
What's bully sticks?
It's like a dog chew toy. I don't know.
Okay. Well, the name of that product takes that to a darker space.
Oh, it totally does. I hadn't even thought about
trying to get my dog calmed down. I got these bully sticks.
No,
it's like, oh, dude, this is about to be a dark episode.
It's this idea that, globalization truly problematic, at least in my mind, problematic at best. Maybe not. Maybe it's led to more things that I even think of that are awesome. And
No. I mean, you're not going to get any pushback from this side of the mic. Not from me. I'm there for that. I love that take.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's Jen and Matt again, and you are listening to Storytime with the Histories, the podcast that's focused on world history stories that are sometimes bizarre, often entertaining, and always factual. Today, we have got a classic meat and potato Storytime episode for you. And guess what? We're focusing on globalization.
Got to do it, dude. Big G globalization,
Big G globalization. But we're going to tackle it from like a changes and continuities vibe here.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, because you know what? To quote one of my favorite podcasters, been using this phrase a lot lately. Let's just hop right into this thing.
All right, go for it.
When we're talking globalization, this is not the first time that we've had globalization, not like when you think about like what it actually is that we're going to be talking about here today, right? Like we have seen rounds of this. And then there's like these events that like maybe they're not technically globalization because it's not the whole globe, but I'm thinking the Pax Mongolica, we've talked about that in a previous episode about bringing people together, the transfer of culture and politics and economic progress and social structures.
But wouldn't that be more Eastern Hemisphere rather than globalization?
Air quotes globalization. Let's call that 1.0.
Okay.
1.0 is always,
I can do that. Yeah.
1.0.
The beta.
It's never, exactly.
Okay.
2.0 would have to be the connection of the hemispheres, right? The Columbian Exchange, and you've got the Europeans working with Africa, working with Asia, working with the Americas now. You've got trade literally crisscrossing the Atlantic, the Indian, and the Pacific Oceans. That's true globalization.
That's true. With working with in air quotation marks as well.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think that one actually works there though. That was totally, totally, that's true 2.0. So we're tackling globalization 3.0. And this one's we're talking about the post World War II world, right? Yeah. So here's a big $100 million question, whatever that old game show was. What was it? I don't even know. We can't.
Wasn't it $100,000 pyramid or something?
Before my time. I don't know.
Shut up, Matt.
I'm just saying. I don't know. Is this an economic term? Globalization.
Oh, that is a really good question. Oh my God, that is a great question. Because if we look at globalization in terms of like this, the most basic meaning of this growing interdependency of the world, then economically it would be because we are economically interdependent. If one goes down, we all go down in all this trade we have. So it could be globalization of the economy would be economic. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you see especially after the end of the Cold War and that like the famous George H.W. Bush line of the New World Order of like capitalism and that sort of thing, where you've got multinational corporations, especially So yeah, I could totally see something.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like maybe a Nestle comes to mind of a company that couldn't exist without globalization,
True.
from where they're sourcing their products to their
Hmm.
production to their shipping,
Yeah.
to their final markets. Yeah, totally. But then it could also be a political term, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay, and I have to be careful with my commentary on this political term because there's a lot of organizations in this that I don't necessarily agree with. But yeah, if we look at it in terms of the idea of collective security or working together at a political governmental level, then yeah, we have like
You
the
don't
League of
want to say UN, do you?
Oh, yeah. The League of Nations, and the UN. I've just got issues with the UN. Everybody knows that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and we've tread that ground
I
before.
know. So I'm just gonna just keep my mouth shut this time. But yeah, it could be if we look at it from like NATO and stuff.
Yeah, the EU,
Oh yeah.
or even it's economic, but it's also political. The World Bank or the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, right? Those all are kind of politically minded organizations. Getting back to that idea of interconnection that you were talking
Yeah.
about before,
Yeah.
but then is this a cultural phenomena?
I would argue it's more cultural than anything else. When I first studied globalization a long, long, long time ago, it really was. It was more about the globalization of culture, of music, of dress styles, of values. And really at that time, very what's the word I'm looking for? Yes,
Westernization.
very westernized,
What
right?
is that term? Let's define that term. Let's define that term for the listeners.
For westernization, it's
Yeah,
just this idea that you take Western culture and values and you spread it amongst others. In the 1800s, westernization looked a hell of a lot like imperialism. Ours is the
yeah,
best, and so therefore we're going to make everybody like us to make everybody the best, which we all know is a bunch of crap. But
yes,
in the 20th and 21st century, I think it's more spreading of less imperialistic per se, more of the culture itself, but
right.
because of the backstory, the historical context of it, a lot of people still look at it as an imperialistic tendency of the West.
Sure, but it's softer, right? I think
Yes,
that's the
much
word
softer.
what
Yes.
you're talking about here,
Yeah.
right? So, for example, like previously, you might go to you're the French, you're going to North Africa, and you're saying like your language, your style of dress, your religious
Hmm.
practices, your art, all these elements of your culture, they got to go. You got to be more French. You got to be
Right.
like us, right? But now you're seeing something like, hey, maybe we're just gonna play this rock and roll music,
Hmm.
and if you guys like it, you could start turning your musical preferences into rock and roll. And it's not just rock and roll, right? You could have
No.
reggae or ska or even K-pop, right?
Yeah,
Like
which is
those
huge
are
right now.
all,
Yeah.
yeah, cultural phenomena linked to globalization.
Yeah.
Or it could be a consumerist sort of thing, right? Like
Yep.
we already talked about some companies, but Nike, Coca-Cola, Apple, Amazon,
Yeah.
Alibaba all exist because of
That's
globalization,
true. Yes.
which then also means you have to have those economic and political structures that we're talking about as well,
Yeah. Agreed.
right? Yeah, so I mean, this is complex, right?
It
This is
is.
something that like I think all of us we hear this term bandied about all the time. Globalization, 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 oftentimes with just positive or neutral connotation.
Hmm.
And there's this assumption that we all know what it is, but like we've only peeled back a little bit of this onion and
Yeah.
already seen like we're having a hard time putting our finger on this. Like this one thing is globalization. It's all these things simultaneously, all at once.
I think everything that we deal with on a day-to-day basis is globalization. It is because you can't do it without the rest of the globe.
Right. Yeah. And I think like it like it seems almost weird to say this. And
Hmm.
we've already like kind of broached the topic, but this is not a European story
No,
either,
not at
right?
all.
Like, it's one of those things like, yes, we see Western culture being this dominant culture, which makes sense given the context of the world after colonization and
Right.
imperialization. However, we see lots of cultures and countries and groups of people, the global south, everybody south of the equator,
Hmm.
pretty much all coming into this space, this global
Hmm.
marketplace of ideas, like this true, like again, that's why I like the Pax Mongolicus Silk Road idea, or the IOTN almost, right? The
Hmm.
monsoon marketplace, this idea of like everybody's here, we're seeing syncretism and exchange and all these dynamic forces. This is not a European story though, right? Like
I
you
Yeah.
Europe's time was the 19th century.
Yeah, they're
This is
done.
not Europe's time.
I am staring right now in my home office at a prime example of Eastern ideas flowing to the West. You know how I love my pop Funko figures, like
Oh
they're
yeah,
my
yeah.
jam. I'm looking at my ones from the anime shows, My Hero Academia, and from Demon Slayer. That is Eastern Japanese Korean culture coming to America, and me being the ultimate consumer buys it all up.
Perfect, right? Yeah, and all of this movement, this exchange, this explosion of African and Asian societies onto the world stage, like all of this really, if we kind of want to go back to like what's this Genesis idea, I think you push back on me if you want to.
Mhm,
It's us breaking free of nature. It is when human beings found this way to start spending more of their time doing the things that they want to do.
mhm.
And the one of the outcomes of that is the ability to consume whatever you want to consume. Like I just jumped over a lot of different pieces,
Yeah.
but like honestly, I think it has to do with this idea that we broke free of nature in the 20th
Mhm.
century, like really and truly and fully, and more than anything else, we broke free of disease and those things that had been limiting factors for humanity through the ages. Right? We just found a way to start overcoming disease.
True, but I'm going to push back a little bit on that, if I may.
Sure.
I think in some aspects we've absolutely let's talk about globalization and disease. I think we've absolutely been able to overcome some disease issues, but I think the recent pandemic with the coronavirus shows
Yep.
us that we are still at nature's mercy, right?
Absolutely.
Because even though, like, I think what you're talking about is when we start to see, we've had terrible diseases in the 20th and 21st century. We had the Spanish flu to begin with in 1918.
True, dude,
um,
that's such a crazy story, right? Like 20, 50 million people died worldwide from that in
yeah,
1918.
and the globalization due to war, like we were globalized and helping each other in war, and then the American soldiers brought it back. We lacked
No, didn't
almost.
bring it back. It started. It
Oh,
started in
that's right.
Kansas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it starts
And
in
then
Kansas and goes to
we spread it.
yeah,
And then, I mean, that many people die because of it. We've got AIDS and HIV, which again starts in Africa, or at least that's where the common sign says right now,
right.
gets transported via airplanes, which we'll talk about a little bit later,
Yeah.
to the rest of the world. And so I think, but because of our modern technology, we've been able to deal with this, right? We
Yeah,
we have
yeah,
we have
and
vaccine for flus now, and we have and we have much more effective medication for HIV and AIDS and
yeah,
stuff like
yeah,
that.
and absolutely. Like I don't want to make it sound like, and I think you're right. I think you're right to split this hair. Don't
Yeah.
I like yeah, like HIV AIDS, right? Like
Mhm.
we still don't have a cure for that. Like if you contract HIV, which is like the virus, right?
Right.
That's the virus. AIDS is the condition, the immune, the
Response,
inability of
yeah.
your immune system to respond to outside infections and those sorts of things, right? Like if you contract AIDS, it's there forever for the rest of your life. HIV the same way.
Right.
However, even with regards to HIV AIDS, we've seen huge advancements, leaps and bounds over the course of the last 15 years and being
Mhm.
able to see people be able to live a life, right? It's not
Yeah.
like in the 1980s and early 1990s, if one were to contract HIV AIDS, right? If you got HIV and then it goes to
You're
AIDS, like
gonna
you're
yeah.
going to die. Like that
And
was just the
yeah.
reality, right? And that epidemic, that pandemic really um was, and that's something listeners, like if you want to, like we're kind of holding back a little bit on this subject. We have
Mhm.
a pretty big series planned for HIV AIDS in the future, but like yeah, like you're right. Or like you said, with regards to the flu, we have a vaccine, it's
Mhm.
pretty effective, you don't die from, but I guess what I'm talking about is this, the ability for people to just stay alive when they contracted the little things, like for example
Mhm.
here, penicillin. Penicillin, right? With the story of penicillin, if you don't know it, listener,
It's
there's a
so gross.
scientist. He's working
Oh.
at this lab. They're trying to figure out ways to get rid of these bacteria, and he's like, they keep striking out, like everything that they're trying, chemicals and those sorts of things to kill these bacteria aren't working. This guy finds this moldy cantaloupe that's like with this weird looking orangish yellow mold that he's never really seen before at the supermarket, not even
Yeah,
supermarket.
I
It's
was
the
gonna say, yeah.
1940s. It's just like a market, right? Sitting outside. And all the other people like passing over this cantaloupe, like, ooh, the guy's like probably like getting ready to take it and throw it in the garbage. And the scientist is like, no, 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 give that to me. He takes the fungus, the mold, they synthesize it. They discover that this fungus has these antibacterial, antimicrobial properties that kills all sorts of bacteria. The types of bacteria that if you contracted them like through a cut and that cut became infected,
Hmm.
you were going to die.
Are
Right.
you
And
telling
now
me that the strawberries that are molded in the back of my refrigerator right now could be the solution to
could be
antibiotic resistant?
fungus. There's also
See,
there's a
see.
great Netflix documentary, Fungus Among Us. Like I know fungus is having a bad moment because of The Last of Us.
Oh,
And
and rightfully so. This
that
this could
that's a
happen.
work of fiction from a video game.
I
Penicillin is real, right? Like the fungal, the properties of these sorts of things, all sorts of people who should have died in World War II, for example,
didn't.
especially on the American and the Allied
Hmm.
sides, the US, the British, and the Soviet, did not die because the wounds that they incurred did not become infected and render them dead
Hmm.
before they were ever able to get advanced medical treatment. Not like say what would have happened at Waterloo or Gettysburg a
Hmm.
century beforehand.
Yeah, and it's actually it's that's a really good point. And then we get, obviously the polio vaccine a little bit later. And
Mhm.
it's really the reason this is so important, listeners, for globalization is because the reason that we're going to see some of the bigger impacts of globalization, which we'll talk about later in the episode, is because our population is growing and it's living longer. And as
Yeah.
a result of that, globalization becomes, in some aspects, much more necessary, but because it becomes much more necessary, we're going to see some pretty significant consequences.
Yeah, yeah, and that whole idea of rising population, that's another like breaking away from nature, right? Like we
Oh
talk
yeah.
about this, if you've taken, if it's a student listener out there, if you took like AP Human Geography, you talk
Hmm.
about this idea of the Malthusian model, or this idea, this theory of population growth that essentially says like human population will grow exponentially if
Hmm.
allowed to do so. Like
Oh,
if you
totally
can
will. Yeah.
figure out like enough ways to get enough people to live long enough to reproduce, and then enough of those babies to live long enough to reproduce over time, you'll see an exponential explosion of population, which was right. Malthus
Hmm.
was right about that.
And for our math
However,
people, that's that parabola curve, I believe.
that's
Is
right.
that what's
Yeah,
okay?
like
Yeah.
we'll throw up a picture in the show notes for you guys to check it out. But yeah, it's just this kind of like very drastic,
Hmm.
sweeping, like we're positive sloping, like you said, parabolic curve.
Yeah.
Malthus also modeled though that like the carrying capacity of the land, the ability to create food, was going to be a linear sort of growth, and
Hmm.
the slope of that line was going to be far too shallow to keep up with exponential population
Yeah.
growth. So where you see the crossover point of population crossing over that line of food, Malthus posited essentially that you'd run out of food, population would crash, and then you'd start over. And to be fair, that's what had happened all the way up to
Yeah,
about the
totally.
20th century.
But not now.
No, because now we can start to use our scientific advancements to create more sustainable farming. We can start to break free from nature,
Hmm.
right? Which then brings us into the green revolution. So,
Yep.
Jen, I'm going to throw to
I
you on
do.
the
I love this
green
stuff.
revolution because I know you love this one. So, take it away.
Well, because it's true, right? If we're looking at the Malthusian from like a single nation perspective, right, and it's a single
Mhm.
nation in isolation, that is what's going to happen. Because if you're not getting any resources from anywhere else, that's what happens. But now, as we are becoming more interconnected in the 20th century, we don't really have that issue. And the reason that our production of food is no longer I mean, it's somewhat linear but no longer completely linear, is because of this green revolution, which really begins in the 1940s. And people think it begins in India, but it doesn't. It actually begins in Mexico. But it's an
Ooh.
American scientist, right, who Neil Borlaug, who starts messing around with plant varieties, plant seeds, and genetically modifies them to become higher yield okay, crops, and also like drought resistant crops. So we take
Ooh.
existing seeds, we modify them. Well, we didn't do it. I wasn't there, you weren't, but still modify them. And now all of a sudden, not only can we produce more, especially with wheat, more wheat, we can produce them in a variety of different environments that suffer a little bit more from drought like conditions. So we basically can grow wheat in places that traditionally have never been able to do that. Mexico, and then India, and then across the globe. And that's just the start of the green revolution. Eventually we'll have different crops and plant seeds that they're going to use. They're going to start using different fertilizers, chemical based fertilizers, and unfortunately chemical based pesticides in order to make the crops last longer, develop more, and produce more food. Because if we didn't, we'd starve on this planet because the
Right.
population is skyrocketing still.
So now we've broken free, right? So now you have
Yeah.
people who are going to be fed. They're going to be able to get basic medical care. And when I say basic, I don't want to sound like simple, but you got
You're,
poked by this piece of metal, go get a tetanus shot,
yeah.
right? Like this
Right.
is just the reality. Um, and as a result, we see population start to do what Malthus thought it would do, which is start to steamroll past, 1 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, when I was in high school, I think we had just hit 5 billion people, right?
Yeah. I
And
think
that
I
that
was
was
4 billion. Yeah.
yeah, and so the difference between you being in high school and me being in high school, not that great a time.
Not that long.
Like
No.
that a billion people, boom, just like that.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things, that's insane,
Yeah.
right? I graduated from high school 20 years ago, and now we're like closing in on almost 10 billion people. We're like close to 9 billion or so right
Yeah.
now, right?
Yeah.
And that's exponential growth almost.
But don't you think at some point, and I will get into this a little bit later, but don't you think at some point, no amount of modification is going to make up for our continued population growth? Like at some point, we are going to hit tilt,
You'd have to think so. And I think when we
right?
talk about some of the consequences a little later,
Yeah.
yeah, I do agree. I like this is not a sustainable model for living the way we do it right now.
Mhm.
However, you can see why people became so enamored with this global prospect of consumption and production
Oh, yeah.
because it you hear ardent capitalists and I think this is a good time for us to swerve into economics and
Hmm.
trade talk about this idea that capitalism makes things, right? That
Hmm.
capitalism and free markets, which is to say like a not planned economy. So the opposite of what we saw with like the Soviet Union or
Right.
Mao's China, where you're going to like, we're going to make X number of things. And then you have like these economic catastrophes.
Yeah.
A free market with like combined with like liberal reforms, like the term for this for poli sci geeks out there is neoliberalism, this idea of an unfettered, unchained economy that like Ronald Reagan and Margaret
Hmm.
Thatcher were huge proponents of in the late 1970s and 1980s in the West,
Yeah.
right? All of these unfettered, unchained, let the consumer and the market like come together naturally would create this society of abundance that like Marx had posited. But you could only do that without any intervention
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, with more people, they're going to need more things, right? I mean,
Right.
even if it's only the basics things, they're still going to need more things. And with neoliberalism, this idea that we're going to turn back to laissez-faire economics, very limited government intervention, the market and the people will decide what's produced when, blah blah blah. Um, it is true, and even
Mhm.
though because it's all the rage right now to lambast capitalism and how evil it is and all this different stuff, and there's certainly aspects of capitalism that are awful, right, without a doubt.
Amazon,
Yeah, I know, you and your Amazon. Which,
Starbucks,
do you know how many products you're wearing that are made by a multinational corporation regardless?
100% of them. That's
So
the thing, right? Yeah. So yeah, you can't ethically consume, right? And
right.
and I think that again, we'll talk about that with some of the response pieces. But
Mhm.
you're 100% right about the fact that like there was this strong movement starting in the 1950s. Really, it starts in the United States. So you were
Oh,
talking about
totally.
this idea that like, oh, we think about these things coming with the Green Revolution coming from India, but it came from somewhere else. This neoliberal thing really didn't start with Reagan or Thatcher. It
No.
started with Hayek and the school of economic theory that was coming out of Chicago, the Chicago School of
Mhm.
Economics, the University of Chicago. in the 1950s, which was a direct response to the New Deal Keynesian economic
Mm-hmm.
policies that we talk about, with this idea of like big government and government
Mm-hmm.
stepping in to basically provide for people. It's the New Deal. All right. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what Keynesian economics really, if you wanted like, hey, when did that ever really happen? The New Deal and then the post-war order
Yeah.
in Western Europe. But like, Hayek writes in this book, The Road to Serfdom,
Mm-hmm.
essentially
Hmm.
that if you allow for governments to dictate to people, eventually governments will consume people's lives, right? So he's saying that the best way to overcome this tendency of totalitarian government is to let people have maximum choice, right?
And
And
I
this
don't necessarily
neoliberal idea was
uh,
was the combination of this theory.
And I don't necessarily disagree with that in some aspects, because if you do look at the command economies in the 20th century, whether you look at Mao or whether you look at Stalin, I mean, even Hitler and fascism is still a government based economy. It does take the freedom away from the people. It did every single time.
Mhm.
And if the government controls the economy, they get to control what you have, when you have, that can take away your life. So I kind of agree with that in the sense that I think capitalism in some ways gives more freedom to some people, but I think that's only look at it from a consumption, look how much access I have to all these different things perspective.
Sure. And I think you can have the consumptive economic choice model and
Mhm.
still have limited freedom, right? Like I know
Yeah, oh
you know
yeah. Oh,
this through
totally.
your academic studies, and we've got an upcoming episode on Chile scheduled for next
Yeah.
season, but with Pinochet, right?
Oh
You
yeah,
could
he's well,
have a free market neoliberal Hayekian modeled economy where you still have totalitarian fascism, right? Like that's possible. Or the reforms of Deng Xiaoping in China,
true. Yeah,
which
I think that's a
totally.
much better example, because I think with Pinochet, it's totally true. It was a market based economy. He absolutely did that on purpose because Chile was having huge economic
Mhm.
issues, but
Yep.
he had to do an austerity program to make that happen, and that limits the rights of the people. And he certainly was
He's a fascist. I mean,
uh,
he's a legit
yeah,
fascist, and
mm,
so there's a lot of that there. But I guess my point is that um, we would be naive as people to think that just by unfettering the economy, we could create a society of equality,
oh, absolutely not.
right? And I
Yeah,
think again, Pinochet in Chile, and I do agree with you. I think Deng Xiaoping, maybe I wish I had led with that one. Darn,
yeah, because it's a
we'll
really
just
good one.
clean that.
Yeah.
We'll clean that up and
Okay.
edit. Don't worry. But yeah, no, like the totally. You could, in fact, that leads to all the Tiananmen Square stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like people are like, hey, yeah. We saw when the Soviet Union did glasnost and perestroika,
Yeah.
and then what that did is it tore down society. And so when you see the same sort of impulses in China of people being like, well, we're economically
Economically
more
free.
free,
Right.
let's get that social freedom, let's get
Yeah.
that political freedom, that cultural freedom.
Hmm.
And then the Chinese Communist Party comes in and says like, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. So what you have now currently in China is you certainly do not have a socialist communist state, right? You just have a totalitarian
Totalitarian.
capitalist
Yes.
state, right? A
Yeah.
single party rule system.
Yeah.
And you can, and I think I think the point we want to drive home to listeners, and feel free to push back on this if you want
Hmm.
to, is that like we would be naive to think that just because we have total economic choice, that
Hmm.
would then equate total socio-cultural political freedom, right? This
Oh,
whole idea being
agreed.
pushed, and like even in the United States right now with people like Peter Thiel, for
Yeah.
example, who wants to push like, oh no, no, if we just had this like libertarian sort of market system, and then all of your power was turned over to the government, so you didn't have to worry about these things, like things, your life would still be fine. Like it doesn't work like that. These are separate systems at play.
Well, yeah, and you already know how I feel about this because I've talked about it numerous times. Is we have all kinds of economic freedom and choice in this country, and I still believe that we are ruled by an oligarchy. I don't believe we're a democracy anymore. I
No.
believe there is a group of rich individuals in this country who dictate all the decisions because they're the ones who control the government officials. They're the ones who lobby and buy them.
Right. And I think there's a name for that group of people, and this is where you get those weird, kind of like the horseshoe theory of politics, right? The professional managerial class
Oh,
is
interesting.
what they're called. And you hear that term bandied about in socialist circles. You'll hear that term bandied about with like the kind of paleocons and the neocons
Oh, yeah.
and some of the more conservative elements of society as well. This group of people who work within a knowledge-based economy. But the thing is, you can't have this society of abundance and economic choice and consumptive models without a knowledge-based economy. Like, look at places like Japan and Finland
Yeah.
and what they did to turn themselves from, like, Finland, a backwater, an agrarian backwater,
Yeah. Sorry,
well
Finnish
into
people.
the 20th century. And Japan, yeah, the Meiji miracle is a real thing, but
Yeah.
the post Meiji system was really a mercantile system. It's not
It
a
was.
laissez-faire
Right.
free market system, right? But both of those countries in the 1970s embraced this knowledge-based PMC economy, and they develop a whole class of individuals who have these highly refined skills. Skills, by the way, that are not going to keep you alive in a state of nature,
Nope,
right?
you're gonna
So
die.
we
You'll be
had
the
to
first
break
ones
away
to go.
from that.
Totally
Yeah,
true. Yeah.
exactly, right? And that's how you get Sony. That's how you get Nokia. That's how you get these tech giants that are then able to take their products and trade them on the world stage because of those international institutions that are pushing this
Yeah.
neoliberalism, specifically the World Trade Organization
Oh, do
and,
not even get me
things
started.
like NAFTA and, Southeast Asian production models, like all this sort of stuff, right? It's also interconnected. And I know it feels like, if you're the listeners right now, like,
Yeah,
what are
this is
we
a
even
doomsday.
talking about?
We did not set out to make this a doomsday podcast, and
No,
all of a sudden I'm like, oh my god, why even bother anymore?
well, we got to stay on brand. We got to, our managers, who are ourselves,
That's true.
tell
Yeah.
us this is what we got to talk about. But, like, really, I think, as I think about globalization, the way all of this makes sense to me is the fact that, like, you need all of these different elements. You need the medical sciences, you need the food, you need the liberalization of the economy, you need the freedom of choice within the market at some level, you need the professional, knowledge-based economy, you need the trading systems, you need all of these things in concert. It's like an orchestra.
And it has
And
to
if
be.
everything's happening at the same time, then you get this society of consumption that the whole world can participate in.
Well, and I was thinking about that. I'm like, oh my, even for the smallest things, like the reason that we're making medical breakthroughs is because scientists across the globe are sharing their knowledge. It's not done in isolation anymore.
Mm-mm.
Or if, we have an educational breakthrough, it's because teachers and or whoever else are so intertwined as a result of
Mhm.
globalization. And that's just, that's that whole concert. The
Mhm.
problem that we're running into is that for some people, the concert is fantastic. The
Yes.
concert is just, people are listening and it's a great vibe, and everybody's jamming and everybody's benefiting from it. I think of it like, I was thinking about Red Rocks the other day because of the big freaking hailstorm. I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, someone
Yeah, yep.
screwed that up big time. The
Nature.
people, if we think of globalization as a concert at Red Rocks, the people in the front rows or even the middle rows are benefiting, okay, are
Mhm.
having a better time at the concert because they can hear better and see the performers and stuff like that.
Yep.
Those are the same people who would benefit in globalization. The people in the
Ah,
back
yeah.
rows, like all the way in the back when you're at the top and you're like, good God, I can't see or hear anything. Um, that's the side of globalization that isn't often talked about because we have solely focused on, I shouldn't say solely, people tend to focus on the good of globalization because that's where leaders want to point us towards. But
Sure,
there,
yeah, so, yeah, we're not all in the band. That's a
no,
good point.
yeah,
And we don't all have premium seats. We don't
we
all have
don't.
box seats. We don't all have front row seats. We don't all have that, like, VIP status, right? I think that those are people with influence. Those are people
Hmm.
who, like you said, the Elon Musks
Yeah.
of the world, right? The people who don't have want in their life. I think,
But,
when we think about this geopolitically, you
mhm,
kind of talk about the global north and the global south.
yeah,
And the global
yeah,
north,
exactly.
the United States, Canada, even though it's in the south, Australia
Western
and
Europe, yeah,
Western Europe. Yeah, exactly. Those are the places that tend to be, those are your
parts of
primo
China, parts of
seats.
Japan, because it's, well,
Yeah,
well, yeah,
yeah,
right
yeah,
there,
yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely, right? Those are the people who have the most access. Those are the
yeah.
people who have the most rewarding global experience,
Well, yeah, they're
right?
sitting in rows 1 and 2.
Yeah, some of us are like Woodstock 90, was it 99, where the people were playing in the outhouses and thinking it was mud?
That's so disgusting.
You
I
know what I'm
can't even
talking.
go
You
there.
remember that, right?
I do, I do, and I'm like, I'm
You blocked that out. They
yeah,
thought it was mud, like in like
ugh,
'94 or the original root side, but it's dookie. Is
that's
poopy.
disgusting.
Yeah, it's
But
gross.
even for us, like we're both teachers, right?
Hmm.
And so obviously our income doesn't jive at all with what we do. But even us, we have good middle row tickets to this globalization concert, I would argue.
I'd say they're even closer than that.
Yeah, I mean,
I think when you look at income and wealth disparity, I think the thing that drives it home, and you brought it up at the beginning of the episode, was the Funko Pops, right? And I
oh my
look
god,
around my office and I've got like a Lego Ninjago ship, and I have 1,000 books, and we are
mm-hmm,
both recording on hundreds of dollars worth of recording
right.
equipment. And this is not our job. We make zero money. This podcast is a money losing endeavor,
Yes, it
and
is
yet we still have the ability to do
to
it,
do it. Yeah,
and not everybody does. And I think that's the hard part. And I love this idea of like what you said, but then there's also, this is okay,
are we
I'm
going
playing
more Debbie
your role.
Downer?
No, I'm playing your role right now
Oh,
though,
good. All right.
because there's also, without globalization, how do you account for, I know you hate the UN, but the
Ugh.
Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
No,
the
I agree.
advancement of women's suffrage, the recognition of human rights, like the right to life, prohibition of slavery,
Right.
equality amongst genders and ethnicities, religious freedoms, to take it down to the granular level, like South Africa and Nelson Mandela and the
Yeah.
ANC, and the ability to overturn apartheid, utilizing these globalized systems of pressure. This rules-based system brought so many people out of crippling poverty and subjectivity. There's a lot to be gained from just being at the show, to
It is
stick with your
okay.
analogy.
Yes. And I perhaps I should with the UN for listeners, I've said this. The UN, I have a real problem with. Not, I love the goals of the UN. I love the goals. I have a real problem with the structure and functionality, especially with the Security Council. I just think doesn't get done because of the Security Council and the permanent members and the veto. So I think because of the way the UN is structured, it's unable to accomplish a lot of its goals. And so, but I do agree. But I still don't like them. But I do agree with you that globalization has led to some really awesome stuff, and especially because of the use of technology. Because you're 100% correct. As a result of airplanes, of radio, of
Mhm.
television, of
The
cell
internet.
phones, of social media, of
Yeah.
internet, we have seen some really positive changes across the globe. And the one that I'm thinking about, I don't know if it's a positive change yet, but the one that's coming up most recently with the protests in Iran, the woman
Mhm.
who hadn't
Yeah.
worn her hijab correctly, and that got out on the internet, and you see this huge swell of support for the protests in Iran and the rights of women. The same thing happened with the Arab Spring, and
Right.
so you do see an expansion of rights, and you do see an expansion of freedoms as a result of being globalized, because the ideas aren't contained to an individual nation anymore.
Right. I think so. Now I get to hop back into my traditional place and
Oh,
push
good.
back on that and say, though, but that because of consumption and the 1960s theory of the society of the spectacle, that even though these things continuously happen, like we are not incentivized to push back in a meaningful sort of way, against any of the abuses, that might happen if the abuses are done by a country who is a key member
Oh,
of
yeah.
our globalization
Mm.
orchestra. Somebody like a China, for example, right? Where we see huge volumes of tech come out of,
Mhm.
and production, just like, just the basic manufacturing of goods that are sourced through stuff like Amazon,
Mhm.
happening because Uyghur slaves are doing the labor. And we know about this. We know about the social credit system. We know about the subjugation of people like the
Yeah.
Uyghur Muslims in Western China.
Yeah.
And yet we don't do anything about it. Why? Because we are incentivized by the system
Mhm.
to want for cheaper goods, right? And that's what the whole Battle of Seattle in the 1990s, the late 1990s was about, right? Where you have those 40,000 protesters show up and
'Cause
say
yeah.
like, hey, globalization's not winning for everybody. And 40,000 people to show up to protest a World Trade Organization
Yeah,
meeting in
seriously.
Seattle is a big deal. Or check out like the hit book, the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which I know there's some like how realistic Is it like what
Mhm.
the story that's being told? My take on that's also similar to like the like Million Little Pieces thing of like, yeah, maybe if some of this is fictionalized, if the majority of it is based in something real that can help
Yeah.
people, then I think it's a good thing. And I think Confessions of an Economic Hitman is really good. Talking like in that book, I don't know if
Mhm.
you're familiar, if you've read that book,
Mm-mm.
but basically the author talks about, he worked for like the Rand Corporation and with the World Bank and IMF, and how loans would be floated to developing countries in the Middle East and in Central
Yeah.
and South America. But the interest rates on those loans would be too high and the
Huge. Yeah, and
companies
they
wouldn't
couldn't
be
pay,
able
but
to
yeah.
pay them back. And so then what you would extract is favorable trade concessions from those
Right.
countries to get access to goods very cheaply, which like tell me that's not mercantilism and
Oh, it
in
totally is.
soft economic imperialization, which means that we have closed the circuit and
I was just
we're right back where we started.
It is, and it made me think. It absolutely made me think when we asked, is it a political, economic, cultural? I do think it's the economy. I mean, think about it. The famous phrase, "It's the economy, stupid."
Right.
Everything is based on the economy. And you were talking about the Uyghurs in China. We and other people do it to us as well. We don't push back against our biggest trading partners because we are so reliant on them.
No, yeah,
And they
absolutely.
don't push back on us necessarily because they're reliant on us. And that's this idea, and this is probably one of the biggest issues with globalization, one of the biggest negative ones, why I honestly believe that there will be some kind of economic apocalypse, some not necessarily near future, because if one of us goes down, we all go down. And if we all
Right.
go down, that is the collapse of the global economy. That's the collapse of everything. And you're right, from that book in saying that is what we've created is as a result of globalization. Even though it looks like everybody's benefiting and we have more goods and more freedoms and more production, that is not really true. Like you said, the global north has a lot, the global south not as much. And we talk about the World Trade Organization and we talk about the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, it is not everybody's equal in making the decisions. It is a select group of people
Mhm.
or directors who are making the decisions. And even though they're supposed to be making them for the benefit of the entire globe, that's not really what happens. They benefit themselves in the process.
Absolutely. And we couldn't talk about globalization without at least touching on the environmental piece. And I
Oh,
think it
yeah.
highlights what
Which,
you
yeah.
just said, which is like we are going towards this environmental cliff. Like I
Oh,
like
yeah.
the science on this is clear that climate change is happening and it's being fueled by human activities.
Yeah.
And the global climate has had all sorts of up and downs. And I know that
Yeah.
the reality is that our consumptive model is changing the planet in a way that no other species or organism
Hmm.
could do, right? This is the Anthropocenic age.
And
Human
you're
beings can
totally.
change the climate, and we are.
Yeah.
And
And for those of us, the people, not those of us, but for people who are like, no, it's not climate change, we're not saying, we're not pointing bad guys or good guys or anything like that. The point is, we have
uh,
almost 9 billion people on this planet. 9
there's some
billion.
bad guys in there.
That's true. When you have that many people who need products, you have to ramp up production. And when
Mhm.
you ramp up production, it affects the environment. Every time we pave over dirt, that asphalt, it's going to reflect heat. Every
Cut
time,
down the most trees in the rainforest ever in a single year
yeah, right?
so we can all have cheaper hamburgers.
And then if we want plastic things, well, plastic is made out of petroleum, and then that's going to have an impact on the environment. And so, and and I know, people get all up about the Paris Accords and all this stuff like that, but regardless of what causes it, the planet is getting warmer, and it's
Mhm.
getting warmer as a result of humans and our consumption
Yep,
across the,
absolutely.
yeah,
The science on that, it's clear. It's clear.
yeah,
And I understand this feeling of like, oh yeah, like, and I think this is going to be a good place for us to kind of close this on out
hmm,
is like, well, yeah, well, how do we continue to have the society that we have, but also limiting our impacts on the environment? And it's obvious you can't.
you can,
Yeah,
yeah,
right. And this model that we built for ourselves, this post World War II
hmm,
globalization 3.0 model was highly effective at bringing the vast majority of the people on the planet into a life of luxury they otherwise would not have had. Even if
totally
you're
true.
living in the global south, right? If there were better regulatory systems and some of the things that you were talking about, your life could be much better
Hmm.
than it ever possibly could have been
Yeah,
without, right? And so that Hayekian sort of thesis holds to an extent,
to an extent, yeah,
right? The question for us all now, and what we were going to talk about, but I think we already touched on this, is like who wins and who loses in all of this. I think at the end, I think we all lose.
We're all going to win or we're all going to lose. That's what it's going to come down to. Yeah. There is
that's a much happier way of saying yes.
Well,
okay. Yeah. I'll give you that. Yes.
Because we will. There's just no way around it. If like, I mean, I don't want to go back on the economy, but again, because we are so interconnected as a result of globalization, if one goes down, we all go down. I don't think we can have one succeed without everybody else succeeding as well, to some degree. And certainly there are things we need to do to make sure that success is more evenly spread out than it is now. But I'm going to tell you right now, I believe we're all going to lose in the end. We like to consume. We are consumer-based culture, and until we're willing to change that, we'll see.
Hey, as Bad Religion said, we're all going to die from our own arrogance.
Totally true.
Yeah. Hey, another classic story time.
Honestly, we weren't trying to go Debbie Downer with this one, but then you start talking about it. And you're like,
you could have just said you started talking, and then everything.
Yeah, once we started talking, it was all over.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair. All right, guys. So that's it. That's globalization in a nutshell. Obviously we just scratched the surface on some of these topics, and we're going to have some future episodes, some more of our, storytime deep dives and those sorts of things in the future on some of these exact topics. So more of this to come, but we thought this was a meaningful episode, something that we talk a lot about, and we never have defined. And so as we move into some of the deeper waters here, the rest of this season and definitely into next season, we thought it would be good to have this podcast in your back pocket. So with that, sign off sort of stuff, make sure you check us out, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, you know where to find us. We're on the internet. Would love, we've had some good love at the end of the season from students, going out there and throwing us some ratings and some reviews and some likes and some follows.
Nice.
Again, FTA for the algorithm. If you're just looking to leave a quick comment, all of that sort of stuff helps. Big shout out to Abington Ridge Music Collective, who did our theme music, our intro and our outro. So we love and appreciate them. And then check us out, Storytime with the History over at, it's called Spotify Podcaster now, no longer Anchor FM, Spotify Podcaster. But you can check out our homepage, a whole back catalog of episodes, and some of the things that we've referenced in this episode, but didn't get into. It's because we already had episodes on that. So check out that extensive back catalog. We're almost at 40 episodes, Jen.
Wait, way to go us.
I know, with a lot of good stuff to come. So with that, Jen, take it away.
All right. Thanks as always for listening. And until next time, see you later.
Bye.